The movie Krull turned out to be not just another Star Wars clone, as many thought it would be. While it shares a few superficial similarities with the space opera genre, Krull stands out as a unique blend of science fiction and fantasy and is particularly about the power of love. If you haven't seen Krull yet, you should. Otherwise, these 20 facts would either leave you confused or thirsty for more. Number 20. Krull is way different from Star Wars than you expected. As of the 1980s, everything science fiction that came into the movie theater megaplexes was either compared to Star Wars or considered a Star Wars ripoff. Just as expected, everyone expected Krull to be another Star Wars clone, but to their surprise, it wasn't. Krull turned out to be way different from Star Wars. Krull possessed one element that other movies failed to have: magic. This was a full-bore fantasy genre movie locked into a world of science fiction. However, Star Wars might have displayed some fantasy elements in it with the Force and other abilities, but in Krull, it went to greater lengths, beating the fantasy elements in Star Wars. In Krull, we are shown more sword fights and sorcery, and the movie blends the two so perfectly. Star Wars is actually fantasy and science fiction clothing, built around a hero whose quest revolves as much around magic as futuristic gadgets. However, Krull focuses more on a hero named Krull, who has been destined to marry a queen named Lisa. Their marriage is meant to produce a son who will rule the galaxy, but a beast gets in the way and kidnaps Lisa. After the whole event plays out, the movie begins properly and focuses more on the adventures of Krull and how he rescues his lover from the beast. The beast, on the other hand, attempts to seduce Lisa with a golden wedding gown and the promise of immense power, but she resists temptation and voices one of the film's unpretentious themes. When she is told by the beast that love is fleeting, power is eternal, she turns the axiom around on him, insisting on the reverse. Power is fleeting, love is eternal, she insists. Eventually, in Krull's prescribed and altogether expected ending, she is proven right, of course. The beast is defeated by true love, and everyone in Krull and the galaxy lives happily ever after. A few critics had a lot to say about the movie Krull. Critic Janet Maslin found Krull to be a gentle, pensive science fiction adventure film that winds up a little too moody and melancholy for the Star Wars set, praising director Yates for giving the film poise and sophistication as well as a distinctly British air, and also bringing understatement and dimension to the material. Another critic, Baird Searles, described Krull as an unpretentious movie with a lot of good things going for it. A retrospective review by AllMovie journalist Jason Buchanan hailed it as an ambitious science fiction or fantasy that even in its failures can usually be forgiven for its sheer sense of bravado. Ryan Lambie, reviewing for Den of Geek in 2011, called it among the most visually creative and downright fun movies of the enchanted 80s, and a well-made film, and an entire galaxy away from other cheap, quickly made knockoffs that showed up in the wake of Star Wars. In a 2006 retrospective, Pop Matters critic Bill Gibran found many problems with Krull, but noted that it had an amusement amalgamation rare for a film released in the early 1980s, where if you don't like one particular character or circumstance, just wait, something completely different is just around the corner. He summarized that it's the perfect pickup film, a movie you can catch in snatches while it plays on some pay cable channel. No matter what point you come in on the story, no matter what sort of scene is playing out before you, the lack of continuity and context actually allows you to take pleasure in the individual moment and, if so inclined, to stick around for another exciting sample in just a few minutes. Number 19. Director Peter Yates employed a weird strategy on set. 2 months after director Peter Yates completed directing the movie Eyewitness 1981, he was asked to direct Krull. After he read the screenplay of The Dragons of Krull, he was intrigued with what he read and accepted the position of directing the film as a challenge. Director Peter Yates did an excellent job, although some of his choices were considered a little strange. For example, Yates employed the use of loud sounds or something shocking on set to get a reaction out of his actors on set. With time, the casts began to grow used to it till the end of shooting, according to Ken Marshall. According to him, In a 1983 interview, he revealed that Krull would be one of those films that can take full advantage of today's special effects techniques and would differ from his more realistic previous works in that he would have to make the movie entirely based on his imagination. Director Peter Yates mentioned that he aimed to set his film apart from the typical sword and sorcery movies of the time. However, aside from a handful of unusual science fiction touches, the film largely sticks to the familiar patterns of the genre. Number 18. The female lead's voice wasn't hers in Krull. Actress Lysette Anthony played the role of Princess Lisa, the lover of Colwyn, who is also a princess and is held captive by the Beast. However, while Lysette Anthony is starring as Princess Lisa in Krull, you'll be shocked to know that it is not her voice that the audiences hear. Throughout the course of the movie, Princess Lisa is voiced by actress Lindsay Krause. Krause dubbed Princess Lisa's character because the movie's producers believed Lisa needed a more mature voice than Anthony could provide. There are actually two Lisas in Krull. If you don't watch the movie patiently, you might end up confused. In the movie, in two different cases, a man has the opportunity to follow his heart to unify the world too and find peace and happiness with a Lysa. For the older generation, that chance at redemption is already gone. Ynir turns his back on his Lysa, and in her fury she takes the life of their child. As a consequence, she is cursed to become the eternal widow of the web, a haunting figure who traps and destroys those who cross her path. Though burdened by guilt over what she has done and the fate she now endures, she confesses to Ynir that her anger demanded someone to suffer. Ynir, now aged and weathered by time, finds himself face to face with the woman he once abandoned. In one of the film's most powerful moments, he offers her forgiveness. Finally understanding the pain and anger his betrayal caused, he acknowledges that he failed their love. Though there's no hope for a shared future, no one has ever made it out of the web alive. They are given one last chance to make peace. It is not a reunion, but a quiet, tragic reconciliation. With the current lovers, however, the mistakes of the past can be rectified, kingdoms can be united, and love can become eternal. Lisa does not accept the seductive wealth and power of the Beast, and Colwyn does not take the sexual comforts of a woman who comes to him. They have learned from their father's mistakes and are not going to repeat them. The fact that both female characters in the film share the name Lisa is very much intentional. This repetition invites the audience to see the princess not just as a single character, but as a symbol, an embodiment of the timeless love interest found in Joseph Campbell's monomyth. In Krull, she is described as a woman of ancient name, suggesting that her identity carries a deeper legacy, one that stretches far beyond her individual story. The name becomes a title, echoing through myth and memory, connecting her to a long line of women who represent hope, destiny, and the heart of the hero's journey. Number 17. Krull starred several British stars. One of the things that made Krull popular in the UK is its eclectic cast, which includes some actors who are well known to British audiences. The cast members include Ken Marshall, who starred as Prince Colwyn, Lysette Anthony, starring as Princess Lisa, Trevor Martin, starring as the voice of the Beast, Freddie Jones as Ynir, Bernard Bresslaw as Rel the Cyclops, and David Batley as Ergo the Magnificent. Alan Armstrong appears as Torquil, the leader of a group of outlaws that includes early screen roles for actors like Liam Neeson and Robbie Coltrane, John Welsh starring as the Emerald Seer, Graham McGrath as Titch, and Francesca Annis as the Widow of the Web. However, a few critics had quite some things to say about the movie's choice of cast. According to Rod Barnett, a movie critic, veteran character actor Freddie Jones takes top honors. He's lucky in that the screenplay allows his character to stretch out and cover a lot of emotional ground. Alan Armstrong is also very good and is one of the few characters in the movie who actually has some kind of story arc. He does a great job and is clearly giving this role 100% from beginning to end. In a better world, or at least in the film with a better script, this performance would have gotten him dozens of similar roles in movies. There are also fun turns by other young actors at the beginning of their film careers. Liam Neeson makes a good impression in one of his earliest feature film roles, and actually has some good scenes as we run across one of his wives in an amusing sequence. Robbie Coltrane has about 4 lines of dialogue. He does what he can with the role, but one suspects that most of his performance was left on the cutting room floor. Lisette Anthony, playing the lead heroine, is beautiful and does a fairly confident job with the rather limited role, but it is obvious that she was dubbed by someone else. The film has several moments of out-of-sync dialogue when she is speaking her lines, and it appears that actress Lindsay Krause was tapped to Americanize the role. Perhaps it was decided that having only the hunky star sound American was a little odd, but it's sad to have Miss Anthony's voice taken from her. Number 16. Many costumes were used in the making of the movie. Unlike Star Wars, Krull focuses on sword and sorcery, so viewers are expected to see a lot of fight scenes. At different times in the movie, the gang of heroes face off against the beast's frightening army of slayers. And the mind-blowing thing about this is that several costumes had to be created for these slayers. In total, 40 slayers' costumes were created for the movie. The design of the costumes has a science fiction tinge to it. The Knights of Krull look like they just popped over from the Tron set, and the Slayers are fantasy dark in an alien way. Number 15. Those horses in the movie had to undergo training. Although a few critics questioned the number of horses featured in the movie and their usefulness, it was impressive that they underwent training. It took months of training to get the 16 Clydesdale horses prepared for filming. Stunt coordinator Vic Armstrong was eventually able to train the horses to run on a treadmill. They filmed the scenes with the fire mares running at super speed against a blue screen. Number 14. The total cost of making Krull. The movie Krull has been estimated to have spent between $30 to $47 million. A total of 23 huge sets were built. The film was shot at more than 10 sound stages at Pinewood Studios. Krull was an expensive film to produce. Marshall and Meddings reasoned that the huge budget was due to several changes in the script's concepts, which led the designers to repeatedly alter the set designs. Number 13. How did they film those quicksand scenes? Another unforgettable moment in Krull unfolds in the eerie swamp, where the band of heroes finds themselves sinking into what appears to be quicksand. Despite how convincing it looks on screen, it was not real quicksand at all. The effect was pulled off using a clever mix of 4 tons of painted cork floating in a massive water tank. The scene didn't just rely on technical tricks, it also depended heavily on atmosphere. The crew was determined to make the swamp feel grim, lifeless, and haunting. To capture that mood, production designer Stephen Grimes turned to real-world imagery for inspiration. In Marvel's Krull adaptation, featured in Marvel Comics Super Special Issue number 28, Grimes revealed that historical photographs deeply influenced his vision for the swamp. Specifically, he couldn't shake the haunting images of rows of crosses from the World War I battlefields of the Somme. That bleak, devastated landscape helped shape the desolate tone of the swamp, giving the sequence a quiet sense of sorrow and danger that lingers long after the scene ends. Number 12. The glaive. Surprisingly, one of the standout elements that really captured viewers' attention in Krull is the glaive. It's a striking weapon, a bladed, spinning metal starfish that slices through the air and somehow returns to the user's hand. It brings to mind Xena's chakram with its graceful flight, and even echoes Thor's hammer in the way it loyally comes back, though the glaive is all about slicing through obstacles rather than smashing them. At the start of the film, the glaive is described as nothing more than a legend, something lost to time. But the wise old sage Ynir knows better. He's aware of its power and exactly where to find it, and he understands that Colwyn will need it if he has any hope of defeating the beast. The glaive isn't just a cool piece of fantasy weaponry, it becomes a symbol of destiny, buried in legend, waiting for the right moment to return. However, it is quite sad that Colwyn didn't use the glaive to destroy the beast. The glaive may not be as great as a lightsaber or as practical because, in reality, you would actually cut your hand every time you caught it. There's no question that it made a lasting impression on kids who watched the movie on VHS in the 80s and 90s. Since then, it has been referenced everywhere from South Park and Ready Player One to World of Warcraft. In the conclusion of Krull, Colwyn finally learns that the glaive is not the source of his power. Instead, it is his love for Lissa and vice versa that gives him such incredible power. He takes on the beast and shoots fire out of his hand like a flamethrower. Number 11. Some scenes were filmed on the 007 stage. Many parts of the movie were filmed in the UK, with the production shoot largely taking place on sound stages at Pinewood Studios. The 007 stage was an enormous set used to film many of the outdoor scenes for the film. They used it for 2 separate scenes during the making of the film. It was such a large stage that it would develop its own atmosphere, and you would sometimes get rain inside of it because of the humidity. According to research, Pinewood's 007 stage used to be one of the largest sound stages in the world. It was used for the swamp scene where the Slayers and several changelings encounter Colwyn and his group. Director Yates described the swamp set as quite nasty. We always had people bumping into things. It was filmed during a very harsh winter, according to Marshall. The set was too big to be heated, leading to the actors feeling cold and exhausted. The crew members struggled to see because of the mist, which led to them accidentally getting into water that consisted of cork chips. Number 10. The music played in the movie was composed by James Horner. One of the most memorable things about the film has to be the music. The beautiful sound was actually composed by James Horner, who later won an Oscar for Titanic. James Horner was brought on very early in the film to get a feeling of the film before he composed the music. The soundtrack is considered a high point of the film. In his review for Den of Geek, Ryan Lambie noted that the 70s and 80s were a golden era for epic science fiction and fantasy scores, and he placed James Horner's work on Krull among the best of that time. He praised the music for giving the film a sweeping, majestic quality that perfectly matched the vast, cinematic landscapes captured in its location shots. Horner's score blends classic adventure stylings with bold experimentation. It features rousing, swashbuckling fanfares and a lush, romantic love theme, hallmarks of fantasy and adventure films from that decade. However, Horner also pushed boundaries by incorporating avant-garde string techniques to give voice to the film's more monstrous elements. For the film's villains, the Beast and his army of Slayers, he introduced eerie, dissonant choral effects, complete with groans and low moaning vocals, layered over rhythms reminiscent of Gustav Holst. The result is a soundtrack that feels both familiar and otherworldly, grounding the emotional moments while heightening the film's darker, more surreal threats. Number 9. The voice and face behind the Beast. What is science fiction without a hardened villain who would stop at nothing in an attempt to destroy the protagonist? Good thing Krull had one. Krull's villain, the terrifying Beast, was brought to the screen through a combination of special effects. This included an animatronic suit. The character's voice was that of actor Trevor Martin. Trevor Martin was a stage and film actor, known for his appearances in popular British shows, including Doctor Who, Van der Valk, Z-Cars, Coronation Street, The Bill, and Inspector Morse. Also, Lisette Anthony mentioned that production members once had to stand with buckets on their heads in place of the Beast in some scenes. Number 8. Some scenes in the movie were filmed on location. Krull was initially conceived as a medieval-themed film with plans to shoot extensively on location. The idea was to ground the story in real landscapes to match its early historical tone. However, as the script evolved through multiple rewrites, it shifted fully into the realm of fantasy. That transformation changed the entire approach to production. Rather than relying heavily on natural settings, most of the film was ultimately shot on sound stages, with only a small number of scenes filmed on location in England, Spain, and Italy over a few weeks. While Pinewood Studios served as the primary filming hub, a few key moments were captured outdoors. One notable example is the exterior of Lissa's castle. That impressive structure was not a full-scale build, but actually a 40-foot model. The crew placed it strategically in the Italian landscape, using camera tricks and scale to make it appear massive and realistic on screen. It is a perfect example of how the film blended practical effects and imaginative design to bring its fantasy world to life, even when working with limited time on location. In addition to Pinewood, some scenes were filmed on location. One of the scenes shot in Italy was of Lisa's castle. In reality, that was a 40-foot model. placed within the Italian landscape to make it appear as if it were real. The movie is shot on breathtakingly beautiful locations in Italy and the Canary Islands. The valleys, mountains, and plains provide a travelogue of this fictional planet that makes you wish it were a place you could actually visit. According to a satisfied viewer, the sets are very well constructed and realistic. They are all quite detailed and very visually interesting. Each of these artificial locations has a different feel and look that adds color and detail to scenes that often need them. Whoever was in charge of the set design and the construction of these pieces should be commended for doing excellent work. Number 7. Steve Archer was employed to work on the creepy crystal spider scene. One of the most haunting moments in Krull, right up there with the infamous quicksand scene, is the encounter with the terrifying crystal spider. This eerie, otherworldly sequence was brought to life by master animator Steve Archer, known for his work on Clash of the Titans in 1981. Archer devoted a full 60 days to crafting this single sequence, using a detailed blend of models, stop-motion animation, and optical effects to give the spider its menacing presence. The first part of the scene filmed was Ynyr's climb up the massive spider web to reach the Widow of the Web. Actor Freddie Jones performed the climb without any safety wires, as visible rigging would have ruined the illusion on camera. This meant the visual effects team had to be extra careful with every shot. The original spider Archer created for the scene was eventually redesigned. However, the first version was made from plexiglass, featuring solid legs, a hollow abdomen, and 8 glossy black plastic eyes. The result was both beautiful and unnerving, adding a layer of surreal dread to one of the film's most visually memorable sequences. Number 6. The title doesn't actually belong to any of its characters. Another major thing that's weird about this movie is its title. One might expect the name Krull to refer to a specific character, as is common in other superhero movies. However, Krull denotes the planet where the story unfolds, and the movie's villain, the Beast, hails from this planet as well. Imagine other science fiction movies were named after the location where the story takes place. Wouldn't that be weird? In 1980, Frank Price, then president of Columbia Pictures, approached producer Ron Silverman with an idea to develop a fantasy film inspired by the growing popularity of Dungeons & Dragons. According to Silverman, Price asked, "How would you like to do a movie based on Dungeons & Dragons?" Silverman agreed and soon brought in screenwriter Stanford Sherman to begin shaping the story. Sherman laid out the basic framework of the plot, and Columbia quickly gave the green light to move forward. Though the core story remained consistent throughout development, the earliest version of the script had a different title, The Dragons of Krull. In that version, the beast was envisioned as a dragon. As the project evolved, the dragon concept was dropped in favor of a more mysterious, reptilian-style creature, which ultimately led to the simpler title Krull. Another early idea, involving a monstrous snake woman, was also removed, largely because the creative team felt it was too similar to the Medusa sequence in Clash of the Titans, which had been released only a few years earlier. Writer Steve Tessich was later asked to draft a new version of the script, but his take was seen as overly talkative and light on visual spectacle. The team decided to stick with Sherman's original draft, making adjustments as needed. Once the script was ready, director Peter Yates was brought on board to helm the film. Number 5. Derek Meddings designed the movie's special effects. If you think the special effects in Krull are impressive, it shouldn't be a surprise because British special effects designer Derek Meddings oversaw them. Amongst his portfolio of projects, Derek Meddings had worked on Superman, the movie 1978, and Superman 2 1980, as well as various Jerry Anderson productions and multiple James Bond movies. British artist Christopher Tucker was also originally in the project but left due to creative differences. Nick Maley and his crew produced several effects 6 weeks before filming began. The effects department often went for challenging visual effects and designs that were unusual to achieve in the early 1980s. Rel, the Cyclops character who uses a large trident, was designed by Nick Maley. Prosthetic makeup covered the actor's eyes while a radio controlled the character's solo eyeball on his forehead. Bresslaw was only able to look through one eye hole while in costume. He explained how, during the swamp scene, the other actors had to protect him from walking into the swamp. Derek Meddings described how the special effects were made for the movie. It was a hard show in terms of effects. Whenever you do an effects picture, you try to come up with something new. Unfortunately, you don't always succeed. You may think you've done something amazing, but ultimately, it's up to the audience for that verdict. We really worked ourselves silly on this one, though. Derek Meddings created miniatures for the setting of the film's titular planet. The model Meddings constructed for Lyssa's castle was 20 feet high. Shots of it were done in Italy using forced perspective to make it look taller than it really was. The model of the Black Fortress was 12 feet high, and an electrical system was used to create the light within it. The Black Fortress disintegrates at the end of the film, so it was constructed like a jigsaw puzzle with parts able to be pulled apart on cue. In Krull, Ergo uses his magic to transform into creatures such as puppies and geese. Derek Meddings used an effects strategy that showed these transformations differently from traditional cross-dissolve methods, reasoning that it had been done to death. He explained, "We did it with a series of blow-ups embellished with artwork so that you could actually blend in the actor." The actor, David Batley, dropped down to his knees, and we used a series of blow-ups to reduce him to puppy size. Then, halfway through the transition, we introduced blow-ups of the puppy, blending the two sets together with artwork. Then, as the last still went on screen, we substituted the real dog, who just wagged his tail and walked away. It was a trick, but it looks quite magical. One of the movie's reviews regarding its special effects reads, "The special effects of Krull were, without a doubt, some of the best to come out of the 80s. It's not CGI, but the different sets combined with brilliant costumes, makeup, and effects blended well together. The fighting was a little staged and rigid in places, but it was overall well done. I loved the weapons of the Slayers, firing off a laser blast from one end before turning it around to use as a sword. The main magic we see used by the wizards in this movie was foresight and shape-shifting. There were no fireballs or lightning bolts, but transformations into everything from a tiger to a puppy." Number 4. Ken Marshall really prepared for his role. Although almost everyone else in the film spoke with a British accent, Ken Marshall did not. However, Ken Marshall did put in all his effort into the preparation of his role. Ken Marshall's preparation for his role included horse riding lessons, fencing lessons, and many hours of boxing, all under the supervision of stunt coordinator Vic Armstrong. He went on to complete as many stunts as possible as well. That scene where Colwyn and his group are being chased by the Slayers in the Black Fortress involved stuntmen taking the part of Colwyn so that Marshall could conserve energy for filming. The scene involved Colwyn and his men encountering a corridor where the floor opened underneath them via two set pieces the size of a small house that were powered by liquid and broke apart before quickly slamming back together. Marshall explained that doing the sequence gave him nightmares after it was completed. When shooting of the scene began, Ken Marshall took more time to say his lines than the production crew expected, leading to him not making it from the tunnel in the first take. Only one crew member noticed this and was able to stop the machines controlling the pieces, but Marshall knew that if the machine didn't stop in 5 seconds, he would be dead. Another take of the sequence was shot the next day with Yates instructing that the speed of the machine be slower. However, Marshall insisted on the machine being sped up and, in the final take, was successful in getting away from the set pieces. Marshall explained, "I had no feeling in my heel for months afterward. It was really hard doing stunts afterwards, too." Number 3. Lysette Anthony was just 17 during the filming of Krull. Another surprising thing about the movie Krull was that Lysette Anthony was only 17 during filming. There was one point in the writing process where it was planned that Lysa would turn into the antagonist near the end of the story, but this was not part of the final screenplay, given that the production team didn't want her to be less than pure. Lysette Anthony also explained that she thought that was a little boring. She was very critical of the film during her commentary on the Krull DVD, and she has a legitimate reason to be. "They cast me because I was young and pretty and had a lot of hair. The hair stayed," she joked. What she meant was that almost everything else that should have been built into her character was missing, including her voice. Number 2. The movie birthed a novel, a comic, a board game, and a computer game. The movie Krull was joined by a novelization, a Marvel Comics adaptation, a board game, and an Atari computer game. The movie was later released on a variety of home video platforms including VHS, Betamax, and Laserdisc. Currently, it is available on DVD, Blu-ray, and digital streaming. Alan Dean Foster wrote the novelization, while the comic book adaptation was written by writer David Michelini and artists Brett Blevins and Vince Colletta, and was published by Marvel Comics, both as Marvel's Super Special No. 20, with behind-the-scenes material from the film, and as a 2-issue limited series. The Marvel version plays down some of the gorier, violent parts of Krull. The comic also features a subtly self-mocking article about living a Krull lifestyle, talking about all the various Krull-branded products you can buy, from puzzles to sleeping bags to Presto Magic sets and pinball games. In 1983, several games were released under license. Parker Brothers produced a board game and a card game. An action video game was released in arcades by D. Gottlieb and Company. Gottlieb also designed a Krull pinball game that never went into production. Atari Inc. published a different Krull video game for the Atari 2600. Number 1. Krull was actually a commercial flop when it was released. Despite its cult status today, Krull was unfortunately not a box office success during its release. In fact, it was a flop. Krull was a critical and commercial flop on its 1983 release, and even currently, it is hard to see exactly what the filmmakers were aiming for. Despite its flaws, Krull is punctuated by ideas, characters, and moments that linger in our memory. It ended up being a critical and commercial failure after only bringing in around $16 million at the box office. It was released the same year as Return of the Jedi, and was hindered by that film's success. Krull is a 1983 British-American science fantasy adventure film directed by the late English director Peter Yates. Yates described making Krull as complicated and just so enormous. Throughout his career, director Yates directed some well-known projects including Bullet 1968, The Deep 1977, and Suspect 1987, amongst others. Special effects artist Brian Johnson stated in a 2009 interview that Yates hated working on the film so much that in the middle of shooting, he took a vacation to the Caribbean, which led to the special effects artist taking a 3-week break from the project. Krull was released in the United States on July 29, 1983, and in the United Kingdom later that December. Krull's world features an unusual fusion of medieval fantasy tropes with futuristic science fiction flourishes and architecture, and the result is something unique. Numerous reviewers have highlighted its visual effects and soundtrack, while several critics have criticized its plot as being derivative and nonsensical. What are your thoughts about Krull? Do you think the movie was intended to fail? Share with us in the comments. Don't forget to hit the like button, share, and subscribe. Before you go, click on the next video displayed on your screen. Thanks for watching.